if you go to Africa, you'll see people as black as my t-shirt. You know what I mean? So to me, I'm not fully black. Like to me, like I'm a halfer. Like I'm light. My mom's like, girl, you're pale.
You know, Jordan Peele, the director of the movie Get Out, called it the sunken place for a reason. Reason being, we can't save all our people. We just can't. And you gotta be at the very bottom of the sunken place to be saying some shit like this during Black History Month. But just do me a favor, leave the continent of Africa out of it.
So I want to ask a question. If a white person tells a black person, go back to where you came from, you don't belong here, that's going to be a big problem, right? That's what being racist, yeah? But what happens when it's an African American person telling an African the same thing? Was that considered? Because a lot of people believe, and you ask a lot of African Americans, what's racism? They say it's when a white person is being racist to a black person. But what do you call it when an African American person is being racist to an African immigrant? Because a lot of African Americans believe racism is just. So my main question again is this: if a white person says, "Go back to where you came from, you don't belong here," to a black person, was that considered? But when an African American person says that to an African immigrant, was that considered? And yes, that was said to me by an African American woman that lives in the same complex with me. Let me show you. That's her car. And she told me to go back to where I came from. I don't belong here. Why? And that's an African American woman telling me, an African man, to go back to where I came from. So, is that racist?
Africans are black and African Americans are brown. This is 100% wrong. Sorry, I have to be upfront. African and African Americans, the difference is not color. The difference is nationality. Keyword nation in the word nationality. What nation you are from depends whether or not you are African or African American. Those of African descent that were taken over to America for slavery, those are now African Americans. They are of African descent but have now been brought to America. Everyone's ancestors, including my own, of Nigerian heritage that were then transferred to America for slavery, and then they had kids, therefore bringing birth to me eventually. We are African American, because originally I'm Nigerian, but was then shipped to America as a product. More on that a different day. Africans, on the other hand, are of African descent and live in Africa, or were born and remained in Africa until they immigrated over. Now you may be thinking, well then why are some Africans darker than African Americans? Because people used to sexually assault slaves, therefore putting some white genetics in the African American population. Hope this helps.
Let's be honest, there's a contradiction we don't talk about enough. Black Americans are often the loudest voices calling out racism, and rightfully so. They stand up when a white person uses the N-word. They demand accountability when systemic racism denies opportunities. They protest when police brutality claims another black life. These are racial causes, yes, rooted in real pain. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Some of those same voices who fight passionately against racism from outside their community turn around and, practice racism within it. Racism is not only something white people do. Racism isn't only external. Sometimes it's right inside the house. Think about the way Black Americans, sometimes treat Africans. How many times have we heard someone say, go back to where you came from? Not to a white immigrant, but to another black person from Africa. The very phrase that black people condemn when it comes from white mouths is suddenly, fair game when it's aimed at someone with a different accent, a different passport, or a darker shade of skin. That's not solidarity. That's hypocrisy. And then there is colorism, which is racism twin brother. Let's not pretend like it doesn't exist. We all heard that speaker standing proudly describing herself as not fully black, a halfer, because her skin tone is lighter than Africans who, in her words, are as black as her t-shirt. Now, pause there. Imagine the outrage if white person said that. Imagine the outrage if a white speaker compared their skin to a black person's, reducing identity to shade, mocking darkness as something extreme or undesirable. But when it comes from one black mouth to another, suddenly people are quiet. Suddenly it's, brushed off as just an opinion. No, that's racism. That's colorism. That's internalized self-hate spilling out in public. And it stings even worse when it comes from someone who should know what it feels to, like to be on the receiving end of discrimination. See, this is the contradiction. Black Americans march, chant, and demand justice when others belittle them. But in the same breath, some of them belittle Africans, mock Caribbean immigrants, or create hierarchies within their own circles. They laugh about accents. They mock food. They call people, fresh off the boat. That's the exact same prejudice they claim to be fighting against. And here's the problem with that. You cannot build liberation on hypocrisy. You cannot fight oppression by producing oppression in your own, backyard. Let me make this clear. Racism isn't just about who holds institutional power. It's also about prejudice, exclusion, and hierarchy. When a Black American woman says she's lighter and they are therefore different from darker Africans, she's producing the same racist logic that once divided slaves into house and field, based purely on skin tone. When a Black American man tells an African student, go back to your, country, he's echoing the same racist taunt Black Americans have endured from white society for centuries. Do you see the, contradiction? Do you feel the sting of it? Because I do. And it's not just about words. It's about wounds. These are the kinds of wounds that divide the diaspora, that make Africans feel alienated when they come to America, when they go to America. That turns brothers and sisters into rivals instead of allies. So today, I want us to sit with this discomfort, because if we are going to talk about racism, we cannot only talk about it when it comes from white mouths. We have to talk about it when it comes from black mouths too. We have to talk about it, about how Black people treat each other, because accountability doesn't stop at the color line. Accountability has to start at home. Now, let's go deeper into this, because the truth is, what we are seeing isn't new. It's a continuation of old wounds, old divisions, and old lies that were planted in our, communities generations ago. Think about the legacy of slavery and colonialism. On American plantations, lighter-skinned slaves were sometimes given, better positions in the house, while darker-skinned slaves were left in the field. That wasn't just by chance. That was strategy. That was a deliberate attempt to divide people who should have been, united in their suffering. It created a hierarchy inside the Black community, and centuries later, we are still living with the poison of that mentality. So when that speaker stood up and said, I am a Hafa, and no, I am not fully Black, I'm lighter than Africans, she wasn't just describing herself. She was echoing an entire system designed to pit Black against Black. She was reviving the logic of white supremacy in her own mouth against her own people. And the most tragic part, she probably didn't even realize it. Because that's what internalized racism does. It makes people believe they are simply stating facts when in reality they are perpetuating prejudice. It makes people believe they are simply stating facts when in reality they are perpetuating prejudice. It convinces someone that being lighter is an identity in itself, as though it carries status. But the truth is, whether you are light or dark, African or African American, the system of racism sees blackness first. It doesn't matter if you're, caramel, cocoa, ebony, or mahogany. If you're black, you're black. Yet somehow within the community, people are carving out categories, creating hierarchies, and reinforcing divisions. And then there is the African American versus African divide. How many Africans arrive in America, hopeful, excited, ready to connect with their brothers and sisters in the diaspora, only to be greeted with mockery. They are told their accent sounds funny. They are asked if they lived in huts. They are told to go back. Do you know how painful that is? Do you know how heartbreaking it feels to flee colonization or poverty or political instability, only to go to America and be rejected, not just by dominant white society, but by the very people who share your skin? That is racism, period. And again, let's point out the hypocrisy. Black Americans have spent decades fighting against the "go back to Africa" insult that white people hurled at them. That phrase is a symbol of exclusion, a reminder of not belonging. Yet when some Black Americans turn around and use that same phrase against Africans, what they are really saying, they are saying we've learned nothing. We've internalized the hate, and now we are using it as a weapon against our own. This is where the conversation, gets hard, because no one likes to, look in the mirror. It's always easier to point the finger outward at white supremacy, at systemic racism, at government policies. But accountability means looking, inward too. It means asking, how am I treating my own people? How am I reinforcing the very thing I claim to be fighting against? Racism is not just about power structures. It's about personal choices, about how you view and treat others. If you mock someone's skin tone, that's racist. If you dismiss someone because of their accent, that's racist. If you create hierarchies of better black versus worse black, that's racist. And it doesn't magically stop being racist just because the person saying it is black. It's time we stop hiding behind excuses. We can't keep saying, well, it's different when we say it. No, it's not different. Words wound, no matter the speaker. Prejudice hurts, no matter who it comes from. If Black Americans want to truly lead the charge against racism, they must confront the racism within their own community. Because how can you demand equality from others when you deny it to your own? Now, let's take this conversation to its fullest depth, because this is where healing either begins or, get blocked. The truth is, racism within the Black community is one of the most taboo topics. People don't want to touch it. They would rather focus on external enemy because that's clear, safer, less complicated. But what good is fighting the external if you're being sabotaged from within? That woman's remark about being lighter than Africans, let's not brush past that. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a window into a mindset that exists in many households. How many families, secretly or not so secretly, praise the lighter child? How many people have heard, stay out of the sun, you don't want to get too dark? How many times have, light-skinned Black people been told they are more attractive, more presentable, more acceptable? That is colorism, and it is racism internalized and rebranded. And then on the flip side, how many, darker-skinned Black people have been ridiculed, bullied, or, diminished, not by white society, but by their own peers? That's not solidarity. That's not empowerment. That's distraction from within. Let me be even more direct. When a Black person says, I'm not like them, I am lighter, I'm mixed, I'm, different, what they are really saying is, I believe proximity to whiteness makes me superior. That's the truth. That's the ugly root of it, and it has to be named for what it is. Now, let's talk about the divide between Africans and African Americans. This division is not natural. It was manufactured. Africans were colonized, their cultures disrupted, their lands stolen. African Americans were enslaved, displaced, stripped of identity. Both groups were victims of white supremacy, but in different ways. Instead of coming together to heal, too often they've turned on each other. Africans sometimes look down on African Americans, calling them lazy or, disconnected from their heritage. African Americans sometimes look down on Africans, mocking them as, backward or foreign. Do you see the, tragedy? Both are swallowing the lies fed to them by the same system, and the system laughs because divided people cannot build power. So when a Black American says to an African, go back to your country, they are speaking the language of the oppressor. They are, channeling centuries of exclusion dressed in a Black voice. And when an African mocks an African American for not knowing their roots, they are too, wielding the weapon of division. Both sides lose. Both sides bleed. Now, here's the real challenge. Can we be brave enough to, confront this? Can we, as, global Black community, admit that racism doesn't only come from outside? Can we sit in the discomfort of knowing that we wound each other? Because only then can we begin to heal. Unity is not built on denial. Unity is built on truth. And the truth is, some Black Americans are racist toward Africans. Some Africans are prejudiced against African Americans. And both sides need to stop pretending they are innocent. So, here's my message. If you're Black and you're fighting, against racism, your fight must include accountability for how you treat other Black people. You cannot demand, equality from white society while practicing inequality at home. You cannot march for justice while mocking your brother's skin tone. You cannot shout Black Lives Matter and then decide that some Black lives, darker, foreign, accented, matter less. The work begins with us, with me, with you, with all of us who claim to care about justice. We must uproot the poison of colorism. We must challenge the hypocrisy of telling others, go back. When we've spent centuries resisting that very insult, we must embrace Africans, Caribbeans, African Americans, Afro-Latinos, and every shade of the diaspora as equals, not as rivals. Because if we don't, we will always remain weak and the system will always win. So I leave you with this challenge. Next time you hear a comment like, I am lighter, I am halfer, I am not I'm not like those Africans, don't stay silent. Call it out, name it, educate. And the next time you hear a Black American mocking an African accent, don't laugh along. Speak truth, because silence makes you complicit. Racism within the Black community is real, and until we face it, we cannot fully overcome racism outside the Black community. Accountability has to start at home. Yeah, guys, drop a comment below. Let me know what are your thoughts. Also, remember to subscribe, like, and share as well. And until next time, bye-bye.